G'day folks, and welcome to the new Falconer Records channel. Now this video is going to be very different. It's the first of a series of AFL, Australian Rules Football related history. Nothing to do with music. The only AFL related stuff I've posted before is when I uploaded that Brilliantly Awful Footy Favourites album. But this is something I've been wanting to do for a while. I was considering doing it on another channel, but since it's established, I thought, why not? So if you're a dedicated AFL super nerd, then stick with me. Otherwise, enjoy the next thing I post on the channel, which will be more than likely music related. Okay, now this is going to be a 6-part series on the top 20 VFL AFL goal kickers from 1897 to 2022. I'm going to be using some very dodgy graphics, but it's going to be a year-by-year exploration of the greatest goal kickers. Looking at the screen now, you could see it just says 1896 because, of course, 1896 was the year that 8 renegade clubs from the Victorian Football Association, or VFA, met at Buxton's Art Gallery in Swanston Street, Melbourne, and decided to break away from the competition. And those 8 teams were Carlton. Now you can see there that I have got the colours of Carlton as blue with a sort of orange top because they had these jerkin style jerseys that had a white chamois saddle on the jumper. I told you this was going to be nerdy, so bear with me. And those usually age to become orange. And then we've got Collingwood, always had the black and white stripes. Essendon, always black with the red sash. Fitzroy, known as the Maroons, you can see there the lace-up style jerkin, again with a chamois trim, so there's that sort of yellow-orangey colour. Geelong, always the blue and white hoops, inspired by the seagulls flying over Corio Bay. Melbourne, known as the Fuchsias back in the day, blue and red as they are today, but again that lace-up style jumper. St Kilda, always the red, white and black, but in those days a very stripy jumper. And South Melbourne, the Bloodstained Angels, so called because of their white Guernseys with the red sash across. Okay, so that's the 8 teams that formed the VFL. So we'll go to the first season, 1897, and immediately see that Eddie James of Geelong led the goal kicking with 27 goals. A big round of applause for Eddie James, the first ever leading goal kicker, and 27 goals in 1897 was a very good effort because some scores were particularly small. Essendon won the inaugural flag over Melbourne, but there was no actual grand final, and they won their last game 1-8-14 to Melbourne 8 straight behinds. Some people complain about the AFLW taking a while to get sort of decent scoring happening. Well, it was happening in the early days of the VFL. Very low scores, so that effort of 27 goals by Eddie James was a darn good effort. Now, we haven't got a top 20 as of yet. I've got really just a selection of players. These are ones who are going to probably feature a little bit. So we'll move on to 1898. And Archie Smith bettered Eddie's first effort with 31 goals, Archie Smith of Collingwood. Fitzroy won the premiership over Essendon. Essendon had beaten them in a final, but there were these weird rules in the early days and Fitzroy had finished top of the ladder, and being minor premiers as they called it, they had the right to challenge. So they came back the week after and Fitzroy actually won the flag. And you can see Eddie James is still leading with 53, so he's the first guy to get past 50 career goals, and we're starting to get some more names popping up. So moving on to 1899, and Eddie James is the leading goal kicker again with 31 goals. Jack Leith of Melbourne has moved into second spot. Fitzroy were back-to-back premiers. They won by a point over South Melbourne, and Geelong's Jim McShane kicked 11 goals in a 23-24, 162-1 behind thrashing over St Kilda. So Jim McShane of Geelong kicked the first real serious bag of goals with 11. Moving on to 1900. And Albert Thurgood of Essendon was the leading goal kicker with 25 goals. And Eddie James unfortunately suffered a knee injury. He kicked 1 goal and his career ended on 85 goals. He was aged just 26. And Melbourne won the flag despite yet another bizarre final system where they'd finished 6th at the end of the home and away season. But then there was this Group A versus Group B, and then they found form when it mattered, so Melbourne won their first flag in 1900. And you see it's very tight at the top. Eddie James just 1 goal over Archie Smith and Jack Leith of Melbourne. to 1901, and Fred Hiskins of Essendon was the leading goal kicker with 34 goals, and I couldn't find any pictures of Fred Hiskins. And Albert Thurgood was champion of the Colony, and Essendon won the premiership over Collingwood. So it's starting to really build up now, and you could see that Archie Smith has become the first ever player to reach 100 goals in a career. Now, 1902, we have a top 20 for the first time, a proper top 20 from this point on. Ted Rowell of Collingwood is declared the champion of the season and is a leading goal kicker with 33 goals, including 3 in the Magpies premiership win over Essendon. Yeah, a few different teams represented at this point, and Archie Smith and Jack Leith are the only 2 at this stage over 100 goals. 1903, Teddy Lockwood, another Collingwood player. A lot of Collingwood being featured here. He kicked 35 goals, which is a new highest total, and Collingwood won the back-to-back flags, and Archie Smith at this point has retired. So you'll notice that a lot of the careers are not particularly long, because they're very much like the AFLW. A lot of the players who came into the VFL would have already been well and truly sort of into their own careers. So they might have been in their mid-20s, even late 20s when the VFL started. So it's going to be a while before we get someone who's going to really start a career young and start to play for decades. So you will see them dropping off after not kicking particularly great amounts of goals. Move on to 1904. Vince Cootie of Melbourne is the leading goal kicker with 39 goals. So we're getting up there. No pictures of him could be found by me. And Fitzroy beat Collingwood for a flag. And a few players now sort of going up into the hundreds. Move on to 1905 now. Charlie Panham of Collingwood with 38 goals was the leading goal kicker. Charlie Panham was the son of Charles Panham, who was a VFA champion who played in the very first VFL game. And he actually became, this guy's father, Charles Panham, became the first player to play 100 VFL games. And he was already well established in the VFA. His surname was originally Panamopoulos. They were Greek immigrants, the family. And this is the son, Charlie, who kicked the 38 goals. And his sister would marry a guy with the surname Richards, and she would produce 2 sons, Lou and Ron, who became legends. Particularly Lou became an absolute legend of the VFL as a commentator, premiership captain, champion rover, etc. And their great nephew Ed plays for Western Bulldogs to this day, which is a lineage that goes back from the Panamopoulos / Panham / Richards family that starts with the very first match in 1897 and still carried on. Fitzroy won back-to-back flags as well, and Teddy Lockwood is now retired, so he's the leading goal kicker with 144. He'd also played for Geelong, and he's not going to kick any more goals from this point on. 1906, now Mick Grace, a former Fitzroy player, now playing for Carlton, became the first player to kick 50 goals in a season. So there's a milestone, including 3 in Carlton's first premiership win, where they beat Fitzroy. So Fitzroy at this point were a powerhouse of the VFL, and again, a lot of Collingwood in that mix. But I can give you a bit of a spoiler alert. There's a 16-year-old player who's just played his first season for Collingwood, and his name is Walter Lee. He'll become known as Dick Lee. And we'll move on to 1907, and there we go. 17-year-old Dick Lee leads the goal kicking with 47 goals. Carlton win back-to-back flags, beating South Melbourne. Yeah, so Dick Lee, immediately he's in the top 20 on 82. He's there at the bottom. And if you'll notice that Eddie James, the original leading goal kicker, is sort of making way for the new champion on the block. As Eddie James bows out, Dick Lee is on the rise. This is the first superstar goal kicker of the VFL. You're going to see a career unfold before your very eyes. To 1908, and pulling back now, you can see the graph sort of pulling back, and Dick Lee has set a new season goal-kicking record of 54. And in 1908, 2 teams were admitted into the VFL, Richmond and University. And University actually start off very well, winning 8 of the 18 games of the season. And Carlton win their 3rd successive flag. And Mick Grace, who's now playing for St Kilda, has retired. So he's at the top by some margin, but he will not kick any more goals. And Dick Lee has leapt from 20th to 8th, sandwiched between 2 other Collingwood players there. I would also just take note of the Carlton colours I've got there with Frank Silver Cane and George Topping. I've got them rendered as just plain navy blue because they'd ditched the chamois that stained over time to become orange to a pullover style jumper, which in this year was just a plain navy blue, hence the name the Navy Blues. Move on to 1909. Dick Lee is the leading goal kicker for the third season in succession with yet another record total, 58 goals. South Melbourne won their first premiership. They beat arch rivals Carlton. Now that game was actually filmed. It's the first film ever taken of a VFL match, and it's quite interesting to look at. You can see it on YouTube. I think it's under the title VFL on Film 1909 to 1945. And you'll actually see that with the Carlton team, some were now wearing a navy blue Guernsey with a monogram on the front, CFC monogram on the front. Some had the plain blue, and some were still wearing the lace-up with the saddle on the top. But it is remarkably good quality and worth checking out. So Dick Lee now is shot up to second on the list in just a matter of a few years. He's there just under Mick Grace and above Vin Cootie. So 1910, and there we go again. Dick Lee, well and truly the top goal kicker. He equalled his best goal kicking effort and just declared champion of the year. And Collingwood win the premiership over Carlton, and Dick Lee kicks 4 goals for the match and was named best on the ground. So a great year for Walter Lee. Moving on to 1911. And Vin Gardner of Carlton is the leading goal kicker with 47 goals, including one bag of 11 against St Kilda. And you can see there he's lining up for a place kick, which was when players used to dig a little divot into the ground, place the ball into the divot and shoot at goal. Dick Lee, most of his goals were in fact place kicks. Apparently he was a deadly accurate place kick. You see Len Mortimer of South Melbourne has shot up to be second on the top 20. And Vin Cootie of Melbourne is now retired, so he, at number 4 there with 212 goals, will not kick any more goals. Moving on to 1912, and Melbourne's Harry Brereton leads the goal-kicking table with 56. Essendon defeats South Melbourne to win back-to-back premierships, and numbers on the back of jumpers became compulsory for all teams. Some teams had been experimenting with numbers, but the football record became published for the first time, bearing the motto, "Fair play is bonny play" on the cover. And that made numbers a thing, so people could easily identify the different players, which would have been very welcome, I'm sure. And Jock McHale is appointed playing coach of Collingwood. He will remain the Magpies coach for a record 38 seasons. And we can see that Mortimer is really catching up to Dick Lee at this point in time. Going on to 1913, we're pulling right back now with the graph. Fitzroy's Jim Freak led the goal kicking with 56 goals. However, if there'd been a Coleman medal for most goals in a home and away season, then Roy Park of University would have won it with an astonishing 53 goals playing for a very weak side. In the last home and away round, both teams chaired Roy Park off the ground. Roy Park would later become a doctor because people playing for University had to have been either in university or at least have the equivalent of the HSC certificate. And he did become a doctor and also did play one test match for Australia. But he only made a duck, and his wife, I think, dropped her knitting. And when she looked up to watch him, she missed his entire career. It just lasted the one ball. And Fitzroy win their 5th premiership. They beat St Kilda, who made their first ever grand final appearance. It would be another 52 years before they would make another grand final. And Len Mortimer now is catching up to Dick Lee, who's only 1 goal behind at the top there. And if you look at the very bottom, Archie Smith, the second from the very, very early days, he's on his way out of the list. Going on to 1914. And Dick Lee is back to his very best after injury. And a mark that he took during the year is the first ever screamer to be immortalised in photographic form. There he is wearing the number 13. And he was the leading goal kicker with 57, including a personal best bag of 11 over the winless University side in their 7th and final season after suffering 51 consecutive defeats. University would merge with Melbourne, and several players in that team would be killed during the Great War that had just begun. Carlton won the premiership over great rival South Melbourne. An emerging star, St Kilda's Dave McNamara, is declared champion of the season. And Dick Lee is now stretching away from Len Mortimer, and Vin Gardner and Percy Martini are snapping at the heels. Go on to 1915. Well, Dick Lee and Fitzroy's Jim Freak combine to both combine to create a brand new goal-kicking record of 66 goals each for the season. In a 9-team league now, without University, Carlton win their second consecutive premiership. Many players and former players have enlisted with the armed forces and are currently serving overseas, and crowds at games have notably reduced. And from this year, St Kilda changed their colours from red, white and black, which were the colours of the dreaded Hun, to red, black and yellow, the colours of Allies Belgium, a country in which several former St Kilda players are currently serving. So yeah, very disrupted year. And Jim Freak there is in the top 5 and representing Fitzroy in their newer Guernseys, which were the maroon with a blue yoke, similar to what Melbourne had now adopted, the blue with the red yoke. And you can see Roy Park there at number 16 and their University colours being represented, the black with royal blue V and a band around the waist. And they're still being used today in the amateur competition and in the women's football competition for Melbourne University. Roy Park having moved to play for Melbourne. Okay, 1916. Well, Dick Lee again headed the goal kicking with 48 goals, and this was the most bizarre season in the history of the VFL AFL. With the VFL now being reduced to just 4 teams, Carlton, Collingwood, Fitzroy and Richmond due to the war, Fitzroy finished the home and away season on the bottom of the ladder. However, since there were only 4 teams in the competition, they did a final series with all 4 teams, and Fitzroy suddenly found form and ended up winning the grand final, making them the only team in history to win both the wooden spoon and the premiership in the same year. So not a lot of movement in the goal kicking there because there are only 4 teams. 1917 and Dick Lee headed the goal kicking with 54 goals, including 4 in the Pies premiership win over Fitzroy. The league's back up to 6 teams with Geelong and South Melbourne rejoining the competition, and Percy Martini is back with Geelong after 1 season with Richmond. And Vin Gardner, who's sitting second on the table, he's retired from Carlton. 1918, and Carlton's Ern Cowley led the goal kicking with 34 goals for the year, and Melbourne's the only team not to take part in the competition. South Melbourne only lose 1 game all season and defeat Collingwood to win their second VFL premiership. And Dick Lee has kicked over 500 goals, the first player to kick 500. 1919, we're back in peacetime, and Dick Lee topped the goal kicking with 56 goals, including 3 in Collingwood's premiership win over Richmond. It's the Pies' 5th flag, and the full 19 competition is back, and the reserves competition began for the first time. 1920, Richmond's George Bayliss is a leading goal kicker with 63 majors, and a teenager by the name of Gordon Coventry has just made his league debut with Collingwood. And crowds to football matches are so big now that some grandstands and fences are being destroyed and patrons are being turned away at the entrance gate. And meanwhile, in just their 13th VFL season, Richmond win their first grand final, defeating reigning premiers Collingwood by 15 points, and champion of the season is St Kilda's Roy Cazaly. And Percy Martini has now retired, so he's second on the list. And Dick Lee is almost stretching out to being double the next player on the top 20. 1921, Dick Lee and Cliff Rankin of Geelong share the goal-kicking honours with 64 goals each. And it's the 10th time that Dick Lee headed the goal-kicking table. That's a record that to this day no one has ever broken or even equalled. Essendon are forced out of their home ground in East Melbourne to make way for railway shunting yards. And Richmond win back-to-back flags, defeating Carlton, who only lost 1 game for the entire season. Carlton's Horry Clover is named champion of the season. So now we go on to 1922. Carlton's Horry Clover kicked 56 goals to lead the goal kicking. And Dick Lee's last year at 34 years of age. He started playing at 16 and he kicked 707 goals in 230 games at an average of 3.07. The only one who comes close is Cliff Rankin with 2.95. And in his last kick, Dick Lee kicked a goal. But he had some very serious injuries. He had all the cartilage removed from one knee and was in constant pain whenever he played. But if you look at him, he's there about double the next guy on the list. So Dick Lee, absolutely the first superstar spearhead of the VFL. Fitzroy won the premiership this year over Collingwood, and it was their 7th flag. And at this point, Fitzroy were the most successful team in the VFL. So there we're going to leave it at 1922. With Dick Lee now retired, he's literally off the charts. He's beyond even the 700 that I've got there with 707. So we're going to come back in the next episode and talk about the first golden age of the full forwards, when the goal kicking starts to just go bunter. So I hope you enjoyed this. I know it's incredibly nerdy, it's incredibly self-indulgent, but I love this stuff. And I'll see you next time with part 2. Bye for now.